Peter Dutton has come out, speaking of free speech and symbols and all the rest of it. The voice continues to be an issue that we will debate in this country until the referendum comes along, and then we'll all vote no for it, which is the sensible thing to do, because it is racist and we don't like racism. That's my point of view. But I'm not going to burn any flags to try and demonstrate that point of view. I'm just going to rely on my speech, my free speech, Daisy. Not that I'm in any way putting you in your place or doing anything as patronising as that, heaven forbid. That would never happen on Outsiders. But I would like to ask the question, where is the coalition? We've asked this question last week, and we did a little skit where we were all looking under our bits of paper for where Peter Dutton was. Well, Peter Dutton responded accordingly this week. He popped up and he's starting to suggest that maybe the coalition won't support the voice. Have a listen.
I'm concerned that the government is making a lot of this up on the run. It's an incredibly important issue, and I know that there are a number of Indigenous leaders now who are, being quoted in articles on background. I get that, but there is a lot of concern when you speak to people in private about whether the government really has thought of all of this through as to what the implications will be. The basic questions can't yet be answered. The original position of the Prime Minister was to put a question on the Saturday and then provide the detail on the Monday. They backflipped from that position. I see Pat Dodson's now talking about legislation. I don't know that Linda Burney is. They all seem to be on different timelines.
OK, Peter, you're the politician, I get that. I'm the advertising guy. You have a simple, clear message. That's all you do. You don't waffle. You get a simple, clear message out there, preferably a slogan. Say no to the voice. That's what you were trying to say then, but you are fudging around. That's what you need to say if you want to cut through and you want to win the next election. James.
I just don't, I don't understand where the opposition is on this, why they haven't really rallied to the no cause on this, because it seems to me the simplest thing in the world for them to do. I know there's some elements in there, Julian Leeser, who is the Indigenous Affairs shadow, well, he seems to be quite pro the voice, and that's a problem right there. He's a great guy on a lot of other things, but on this he's completely, wrong. Go to Jacinta Price. Go to Jacinta Price. But, beyond that, though, why are we not making just, more absolute fun of the absurdity of this situation? Like, why are we saying, oh, well, we have all of these different groups. Why don't they all have a voice to Parliament? I mean, you point out the absurdity of once you start having race-based, representations to Parliament, which are not a third chamber, but as Albanese, Prime Minister Albanese said, it would be a very brave Parliament indeed that ignored it. We don't even know what sort of, rules affecting Indigenous Australians this thing would cover. I mean, it could cover absolutely anything, because every law that affects all Australians will affect them. So does every single piece of legislation. I mean, if it's a change to credit regulations or speed limits or zoning rules or whatever, do they all have to go through this thing? We don't know. And if it's only just for certain specific targeted things, well, show us what evidence that this thing would improve outcomes one bit, would stop one act of domestic violence, would get one kid to go to school more often, would have any of the dysfunctions that afflict remote communities especially, how would any of that be affected? Well, we know what's going on. They've just voted to they're voting to get rid of the cashless welfare card against the wishes of an awful lot of Indigenous people, so much for their voices, but no, the activist class wants it gone, and that's exactly what's going to happen with every single issue once this comes along.
Well, Daisy, we discussed it a couple of weeks ago. Janet Albertson came out with those 10 questions that legally had to be answered before anyone could even contemplate the voice, and obviously those 10 questions are unanswerable from what has been put forward by the advocates of the voice. We had Greg Craven responding in the Weekend Australian yesterday saying, oh, here's 10 questions for those people saying no to the voice, and he kind of put forward this classic lefty argument, James and Daisy, that here's our thing, here's our radical proposal, we're going to turn everything upside down. You've got to tell us why we're wrong to do it. You've got to explain why it's got to stay the same. No, we don't.
No.
We don't have to answer your 10 questions.
You don't have to answer your 10 questions, Greg.
Not interested in your stupid 10 questions, because we don't need what you are proposing. There's no requirement for it in any Westminster system. Take your 10 questions, They're ridiculous. We don't need to answer them. You need to answer why you want to overturn our democratic, 122-year-old constitution, turn it on its head to give power, unlimited, unrestricted, undefined powers to a group of people based entirely on their race.
Well,
you answer that. We don't have to answer anything because we're saying no. And the other thing is you said, oh, if you're saying no, you're really saying yes. No means no, Greg. We all know that. Sorry, Daisy.
No, exactly. Exactly what you're saying. You do not have to prove a negative. We do not have to prove a negative. It's the same principle. If you go to court, you don't have to prove you're innocent. The other side has to prove that you're guilty and should go to jail.
But the thing is, too, is that I read that article by Greg Craven, and I'm sorry, the name Greg Craven in this particular instance was a bit apposite. We'll just say that. But because it's all based on this weird sort of playground politics of, they were here first, so they have different rights than someone like me, who came here 20-some years ago, and therefore apparently has less rights than...
Fewer rights. Thank you.
Fewer rights. Thank you very much.